I don't know if you've ridden something other than a Shimano chain, Fatty, but, okay, bit of a confession here. I have. Yes, occasionally my curiosity gets the best of me, and I do test.
I feel like we should be in a special booth for this, Hottie. After everything that we have said about Shimano's drivetrains, especially its chains, you go off and cheat like this.
Yes, I'm a big cheater, I know, and a huge apologies. But, when I do stray, I do learn my lesson. Look, I give the other chains every chance. They get a cleaning. They get a dip in my hot wax pot, and while I'm riding them, I think, hey, this chain is pretty good. Then I pop on one of my Shimano chains, and it all comes rushing back. The quiet, the smooth shifting, and once again, I'm reminded that there can be only one true chain love for me, and that is Shimano.
Sounds like a completely different podcast. I'm not Catholic, so I'm not exactly sure what I should tell you your penance should be. But this is the most bizarre Shimano read we have ever had. A love letter to a chain, Hottie. You need counseling.
Yes, I do. Or I need a rosary or something here, Let's just leave it at this for now. There are other chains, and if you are on a 12-speed group that is not Shimano, then you may be stuck with another branded chain. But if you ride 12-speed Shimano gears, or if you're still on 11-speed anything, take it from someone who has played the field. You need to be on a Shimano chain. Check out Shimano chains at bike.shimano.com, and thank Shimano for putting up with me and for being the title sponsor of this show.
3, 2, 1.
Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. It is season 7, episode 5 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I am Michael Hottie, Hottie to most.
I'm Eldon Nelson, but please, by all means, feel free to call me Fatty. We are giving this episode a special tagline, the highest, hardest one-day eating contest in the country. Yes, we are back in the feed zone to talk nutrition strategy.
And here comes Eldon Nelson with 14 minutes to spare on that clock. The bragging rights and the heavy hardware, that's all you. Welcome back to your Leadville family and your finish line.
But first, it is FFT, which to an engineer is Fast Fourier Transform. But to the Leadville racer, it is Fatty's finishing tips.
I like the idea of just pronouncing the acronym like a word. So
That's right.
Here's a little behind the scenes info on my I beta test all of these tips with the Hammer, who has more Leadville 100 finishes than any woman not named Roxanne Hall. And the fact that Lisa's got a 100% finish rate tells you that her opinion on finishing tips carries some weight. And Hottie, she said this one is the most important one I've had so far.
So what is the Hammer-approved tip this time?
It is one that can actually make a difference whether you and the people around you finish the race, Hottie. Call and reply. There are 1,600 or so of us out there every year, and 1,500 of us don't do it for a living. That is a big crowd of citizen racers amped up on adrenaline at altitude, ranging from, very stupid high to extremely stupid high. The way we keep the rubber side down is by awareness and communication. So when you need to pass, call it out. Whether you're going uphill or down, or even when you have to pass close on the flats, don't surprise anyone anywhere. And the other half, of course, of call and reply is just as important. Reply. When someone lets you know that they want by, let them know you heard and help them get by safely. If you can wave them by on one side, do. If there's a reason they should not pass that instant, like Keegan is bombing down Columbine toward you at 40 miles an hour, actually yell it. I try to keep this call and reply friendly and conversational on the climbs, which is, where I do most of my passing. Generally, as I approach, I just say hi, and then, hey, can I come by on your left? Of course, when you're passing on downhill, there's no time for chat, but there is enough time to yell, passing on your left, or just coming by, hold your line. Every year, Hottie, you hear of racers who are getting tangled up on this race, and a little communication can be the difference between finish the day on the red carpet or in the hospital.
I'm a big believer in bells, especially on mountain bikes, especially on public trails where you have lots of people walking or walking dogs or other cyclists. But in my times racing Leadville, I don't remember hearing any other riders. How do you think a bell would go over?
I have raced with a bell, and I have had people racing with a bell. It is valuable, except for when you are in a crowd and you can just hear a bell and it doesn't communicate quite enough. It tells you there is someone nearby, but it doesn't necessarily tell you what they want to do. So I would say, yes, bells are great. Have one. A cha-ching is kind of nice to help, but you do need to communicate a little bit more affirmatively when you are passing someone in a race that where people are just a little bit goofy and need a little bit more extra communication.
Yeah, a bell might work once the race really opens up. Say you get to the top of power line, outbound, and you're a person who can really descend quickly, and you're going to want to be able to go past a line of riders who are kind of taking they're trying to be careful as they go down power line. You could just be on the bell, ringing it, and people know somebody's coming. And in addition, I think being verbal too to people, like coming on your left, coming on your right, is a great tip there. Any additional communication tips?
Yeah, one bonus one here to go along with the call and reply, and that is assume the best. I am pretty sure everyone wants the best for everyone at this race, but we are, as I have said, a little bit goofy when we race at altitude. So if someone doesn't do a smart pass or doesn't communicate, believe that they normally would and continue with your race. Just let it go. Anger takes energy, and you don't have any energy to spare when you are doing the Leadville 100.
All right, call, reply, maybe a bell, and assume the best.
It's a Hammer-approved FFTE, Hottie.
Oh, we appreciate that. Thank you, Hammer. Love that. You have a real podcast going when you have a podcast t-shirt. And thanks to DNA Cycling, we do.
Yeah, and it is a pretty darn smart one, if I do say so myself. It pays homage to the analog days from which Hottie and I come from, and to our world-famous Leadville tagline. On the front is a cassette tape with the tape unraveling to form the profile of the Leadville course. And on the back, in big bold letters, it says the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country.
Oh, yes, that is pretty smart, which means we had very little to do with the design and layout. That is mostly DNA. Fatty, why don't you tell us about our smart-looking jerseys as well?
Yeah, absolutely, Hottie. The jerseys pull from part of our tagline, the part where we say highest. The black jersey in the more relaxed cut emphasizes the race profile, and the pink and blue race cut has silhouettes of Leadville's Grand Mountains. Both jerseys come in men's and women's cuts.
Now, the store will not be open forever. Orders need to be put in so jerseys and tees can be made especially for you. Find all of this wearable gear at leadville.fm/jersey. So where do we sit with dropper posts for the Leadville 100? I don't know. It still seems to be a toss-up. What are you going to do with your new bike build of yours, Fatty?
Oh, I am struggling with this, Hottie. I am not a natural with a dropper post yet. This past winter's, my fat piking has kind of brought me closer. So right now I am planning to do a 300 millimeter NV rigid post, cut down a little shorter to save a gram or two. However, I am having my Firefly frame built with routing for an internal dropper because Lisa loves the G-Series dropper post that she has on her Epic. So this might be the year that I do go dropper, but it also might be the year I stick with the tried and true rigid NV post.
Yeah, if you're a good to great bike handler, then maybe save the weight and go with a rigid post. And if that's the case, you can also choose an NV. I have one of their 400 millimeter posts on my Niner. It's been great. The NV clamp system is not what it was when the post first came out. Some riders got rid of the old posts because the clamps could slip. NV fixed that years ago, so it's not an issue.
Yeah, I do not have any trouble whatsoever with my NV posts. And It's been a long time since I have ridden with anything but an NV Post. It is so reliable on the Leadville course. No slips, absolutely no breakage. And trust me, folks, I have had that happen with another brand's post during the Leadville race, and that is no bueno.
Look, rigid seat posts are not sexy, but unless you want to stand for the entire 105 miles, you got to have two things. You got to have a saddle and a seat post. And if you're going the lighter route here, make it a Carbon Envy mountain bike seat post. You can find one at Envy. That's ENVE.com.
Something we've seen, especially from the front of the race, is athletes sticking to one brand of fuel and hydration. Keegan, in particular, has fueled his Leadville winning rides using an ecosystem, sort of an approach to his intake.
That's right. Keegan's record-setting ride and his other wins have been fueled by NeverSecond. Now, you've heard Fatty and I discuss this brand before in our feed ads, and we're going to talk about what the feed has in a little bit, but we wanted to get inside Keegan's jersey pockets and bottles and see why this works. We caught up with one of the founders of NeverSecond, Bill Armstrong, to have him explain and at times defend this practice of sticking with one brand, namely his, for fueling and hydration. Tell me about NeverSecond. You are one of its founders.
I am. My name is Bill Armstrong. I'm one of the founders at NeverSecond. Started the brand about 2.5 years ago with Oscar Juykendroop. He's a renowned Dutch scientist based in UK.
Mm-hmm. And when you guys started the brand, I mean, give us a little quick brand story. Like, what space were you trying to fill? What did you think was not being done that you guys could do better?
Well, before NeverSecond, I had a prior company that, and my background is as a product developer. That business was acquired back in 2018. I exited that business in 2019. And I, after a short period, decided that I wanted to kind of re-enter with a different business where I could really combine the product development expertise that I have with working with endurance athletes, which is a lifelong passion of mine. That led me to reaching out to some friends who put me in touch inevitably with Oscar Juykendroop, who is, again, one of these renowned scientists in the space. And that we had some early discussions about if there's a reason for a new brand like NeverSecond to exist. And we were both convinced that there was, and we started about 2.5 years ago. Yeah.
So NeverSecond is the brand we've talked about on the show before. It is known for that easy-to-count carbohydrate theory. Fatty has talked about racing stupid and how hard it is to keep up with your calorie intake. Folks, NeverSecond is the brand where we've talked about the easy to add up 30, 60, 90 portions that are doled out. Was that part of the idea of the company originally, just to make it easy to add up carbohydrates?
Yeah, that actually is a really great question. When Oscar and I first met, I asked him the critical question that I think all startups have to ask themselves is there a reason for us to exist? And to this day, I remember Oscar's words. They're, come from 25 years of experience. He, again, is a global leader in the space. He said to me, for the last 25 years, athletes really haven't gotten much better at fueling. There's just new brands and new products. But inevitably, athletes are fundamentally confused. A lot of the products use arbitrary nutrient values, a lot of unnecessary ingredients, and they're mostly being pushed by brand marketers who don't really have a scientific background. And so I said to Oscar, what would success for us look like? Or what does that look like for a consumer? And he said, well, athletes need a way to easily calculate their intake. And in order to do that, all the products really need to use 30 grams of carbohydrate or multiples thereof, which really mirror the global endurance fueling standards. So for instance, you're out for an hour, you need 30 grams. As you're out for 2 hours, you might need 60 grams an hour. You start heading above 3 hours, the global guidelines are in the neighborhood of 90 grams an hour. And yet all the products in the market use these arbitrary carbohydrate values. So all of our products would need to use 30 grams of carbohydrate or multiples thereof. And they also would need to use the same carbohydrate composition. In this case, it's 2-to-1 glucose to fructose. The reason we do that is that you're able to mix and match the products as a system instead of just kind of running around telling athletes telling them to take a gel or take a drink or take a bar. We're telling them we have a system of products here for you where you can mix and match them according to your preference or based on on-course practicality or training practicality. Based on your duration, you're able to kind of pick and choose the products, and they're meant to be mixed and matched and combined.
Which is going to get to our little discussion here, and that is ecosystems, whether or not you should be in a nutritional ecosystem. Now, NeverSecond offers bars, gels, and drink mixes. Hottie here, when I would race, as many people on the show know, I like to just have a smorgasbord. Like I would stop at Twin Lakes and maybe eat a cinnamon roll and guzzle down some fluid. And on the bike, I might eat a stroopwafel or a sandwich bite and drink some other type of fluid mix. Bill, tell me why an athlete should choose an ecosystem, a nutritional ecosystem like a NeverSecond, over the more varied approach, I'll call it.
Well, I think a lot of it is going to come down to, let's say, the type of session. So in a training session where your intensity, for instance, is very high, you can have a little bit more, I'd say, latitude in using imperfect food choices. Once you start getting into more intense training sessions or race sessions, where our goal is, again, we work with both everyday athletes all the way up to your top level professionals. When they start doing more intense sessions, you want to take in fuel that is going to be efficient. And by that, I mean, you want the maximum amount going into your muscles for work and the least material going into your gut to make you sick. Fundamentally, carbohydrate is your ideal energy source for your muscles. 2-to-1, which is what we use, 2-to-1 glucose to fructose. That's the ratio of the carbohydrate. That is 2 parts glucose to 1 part fructose in the formula. Fundamentally, is a very efficient carbohydrate combination. By that, I mean that the most is being used for work, with the lowest percentage going, or among the lowest percentages going into your gut to make you sick. And that's really that's our goal. Give athletes as much energy as you can without making them sick. And so, right now, especially under race conditions or more intense training sessions, if you start to take more imperfect food combinations, or you start to mix our products with other products or with certain solid foods, you might start to increase your incidence of developing GI problems. And so that's why I'm always going to, when it comes to these more intense racing situations or training sessions, certainly products that are performance type products that are highly efficient are going to be the better choice.
And let me explain as to why I, for instance, and this was the narrative long before NeverSecond became a company, was that we were being told it was better to have hydration in your bottle and food in your pocket. You should be chewing food, eating sometimes real foods or semi-real foods, and then drinking our hydration, or in other words, leaving our bottles to hydration. What in the science or in the makeup of products has allowed a company like NeverSecond to change that narrative?
That's a really great question. I think one of the things that Oscar has really instilled in me is this kind of overcomplication and inherent confusion that comes from a lot of the brand communication that's out there. And so, for instance, a lot of athletes will, once we tell them like what they should do, they're like, well, okay, I understand the science. What do I need to do? And fundamentally, when we tell athletes, what to consider, what fundamentally matters from a pure performance perspective is three pieces of information. You need to worry about your fuel. You need to worry about your sodium. You need to worry about your fluids. Now, a lot of brands will overcomplicate and start to get into trace electrolytes, or they'll talk about, certain types of solid foods. We fundamentally, we like to keep it simple, where we're talking about fuel, sodium, fluid. With our products, really, as far as we're concerned, the body doesn't really recognize the difference between taking water or taking fluid that's water in the form of a sport drink. And so, a lot of times, some athletes will, at some point in a race, for instance, they may want to take a break from sport drink and move into a combination of gels and water. It's perfectly fine as long as you're kind of checking those boxes between your overall fuel intake, your sodium intake, and your fluid intake.
And again, it's one of the reasons the company exists is to give a person, an athlete, simply one brand to mix and match all that stuff. I mean, that's the idea here. And I guess you would warn people against using some NeverSecond combined with some Cliff product, combined with some untapped product?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, it's a common question that we get asked from a lot of athletes is, can I mix and match? And look, there are a lot of cases where athletes will mix and match and not have a problem. But when you're mixing and matching products, you could be, especially like, for instance, we never would advocate that you mix our products with other products. And it's not because we're, I guess, trying to force athletes into an uncomfortable situation. What we're really trying to do is just to help them understand that when you're mixing compositions of different products, your potential incidence of causing GI problems will increase. So an example, we have athletes who will tell us they're taking a specific food bar with a NeverSecond product. Now, we may know that that fuel bar may have excessive amounts of fiber, for instance. Fiber will often slow down, sits in your gut, and will often slow down carbohydrate absorption, which will eventually lead to potential for gastric distress. And so we always encourage that athletes use NeverSecond products exclusively as a closed system, a closed loop of products.
There's been a lot of discussion about how much an athlete can do, how much they can take in, depending on size and output, obviously. First of all, how does an athlete figure this out? And what have you seen, and what do you think are the upper ends of carbohydrate intake per hour for some of the best athletes?
I mean, we have some athletes right now that are top professionals that are hitting intakes that are 150 grams an hour and higher. We certainly do not ever recommend that for an athlete who has never taken fueling products before. Generally speaking, athletes, runners, generally will have lower intakes just because of the jostling action that goes with running. They'll generally have lower intakes than cyclists, as example. And so a lot of times when we give those guidelines around 30 grams or 60 grams or 90 grams per hour, those are general guidelines that ultimately need to be evaluated on an individual case-by-case basis. If an athlete, for instance, is a runner and they say they've never taken fuel before, we would encourage them to start with 30 grams and see how it feels. Try move up to 45 or 60 grams an hour and see how that feels. And then they can, because what we need to remember is the gut is highly trainable. Gut training is something that a lot of athletes don't spend any time or enough time doing. And so we have some of our professionals, as example, two of our top professionals in the gravel space. They can't, when they start the new season, because their intake in the winter months is usually lower because they're doing slower sessions. They're not necessarily as worried about their fueling. When they start the season, their intakes are not as high as they are, in the kind of the later stages of the spring, where they start to really kind of work on their gut training. So the advice I give to athletes is start slow. Gut training takes typically 6 to 8 weeks. So while you're also considering the duration, you also need to consider the activity and then also gut training that goes into that.
But it is trainable, right? And it is, I mean, again, give us some increments here, like how aggressive, how much time should we be taking to this, and what are the levels of jumps we should be making?
That's a really good question. So I typically recommend for an athlete who's getting ready for a specific event, if they've never taken performance fuel before, they should really try and allow 6 to 8 weeks. What they should try and do is take 1 to 2 critical training sessions in a week where they really try to implement their fueling. So it's not something that, even though they may be using fuel to some level every day, they should really focus on kind of trying to simulate, if they're getting ready for a specific race, as an example, to simulate that during training. With that said, generally speaking, we would start with the guidelines. For instance, if an athlete's going, we recommend 60 grams an hour at, let's say, 2 hours. A runner may be perfectly fine taking 60 grams an hour over a 2-hour period of time. Another runner may have more issues. He may be only able to take 30 grams. I would say, generally speaking, and working with a lot of runners over the years, I would say that, the top end that I've ever seen from runners is typically 60 to 90 grams, where in cycling you're seeing intakes that are 90 up to 150 grams, depending on the athlete. I think Oscar also, at one of his great pieces of advice that he said to me is, he said, ultimately, proper fueling there's no awards for carbohydrate intake. And so it is still an individual thing. And so while we have athletes coming to us saying, I could take 150 grams an hour, we always have to ask ourselves, did you actually need that? And so it goes, when we look at every athlete, we ultimately, because there are some differences, I would say the general advice we would give is look at applying the advice around duration. So for instance, 60 grams over 2 hours, 90 grams, 3 hours and longer. Start maybe 25% lower than those values as kind of a starting point. Use it in training, see how you feel, increase it to the point where, we're hitting the guidance level that we recommend. And then ultimately, that's what you would carry through to race day.
The Leadville Trail Mountain Bike 100 is, in addition to being an eating contest, it's also a drinking contest. You got to stay on top of your hydration. Again, NeverSecond has hydration/fueling products that you put in your bottle. Let's though talk about sodium. Sodium's become this massive topic recently. And if I'm in the ecosystem, I feel like I'm locked into whatever sodium you've decided for these particular hydration products. How do I deal with my variable or my personal needs, sodium needs, as an athlete when I'm working within this system?
That's a great question. I'd start this to answer this question by saying that, Oscar and I have had extensive conversations around electrolytes and around sodium, and he and a large percentage of the scientific community would certainly say that electrolytes have been overhyped. And by overhyped, I mean that a lot of brands are running around telling athletes to take copious amounts of electrolytes without any evidence really behind the advice. All of the products that we build and our sodium levels that are in our products are all built upon evidence-based research. So our position on sodium is that your average athlete sweats out anywhere between 500 to 800 milligrams of sodium per hour. And so we put 200 milligrams of sodium in all of our products per 30 grams of carbohydrate. So there's 200 milligrams of sodium per 30 grams of carbohydrate. The reason we do this is so that athletes, when they start to take be in sessions where they require 90 grams of carbohydrate or higher, they're automatically hitting 600 milligrams of sodium during that same hour. So we do have coming out this year, I will say a little bit about this. 95% of athletes fall within that range of 500 to 800 milligrams of sodium loss per hour. There are an outlier group, heavy sodium sweaters. We work with a number of heavy sodium sweaters, and they require more than our products are able to provide them if they're just taking our fueling products. So they oftentimes have to supplement their sodium intake. What we're doing, coming this year, one of our new products that's really exciting, I'm super excited about it, is we're coming out with a sodium additive, which will allow athletes who are that outlier group the ability to use a NeverSecond product that's been banned substances tested, and to be able to add that to their existing drink mixes to bump their sodium levels to hit so that in a sense, athletes will be able to personalize their regimen more, which is great.
It's something they should be tested for first, though. A sweat test is never, I would think, not a bad idea to really dial this stuff in.
It's a great idea. There are some inexpensive tests out there. Obviously, some athletes, the professionals, have access to this testing, and a lot of them take advantage of it. A lot of amateur athletes, it becomes a matter of, is it important enough to them to actually test it? We generally work with athletes that are everywhere from pretty serious amateurs all the way to professionals. Most of them are really interested in this kind of information, and we think it's really, really important. I would certainly say if you're an athlete, and for instance, you see a lot of white on your clothing when you're sweating, that's a pretty good indicator that you might be a heavy sodium sweater. There are kind of visual signs. That's obviously not very scientific. So we always recommend that athletes do seek out a sweat test. At the same time, if they are seeing kind of white on their gear when they're sweating, generally speaking, they may want to evaluate their sodium intake.
Bill, we see a lot of athletes, who simply a bonk just ruins their day. They just don't have the energy in the end to make it to the finish line, or even if they get to the finish line, they feel just drained, terrible. When you come across an athlete like that, what's one of the things or two of the questions you ask them right away? What are the things you want to know about what happened during their day?
Well, I mean, for us, whenever we meet an athlete, it would be whether it's, I mean, I think every one of us has bonked at some point, and some of us many times. And I think that when we first meet an athlete, and we go to, well, at this year we'll be going to dozens of expos. We a lot of times like to meet athletes out in the field, and we talk to them before they race, we talk to them after they race, and we're always, I would say, amazed at, there are some athletes who certainly know exactly what they're doing. And they have a good game plan. There are a lot of athletes, though, who also kind of wing their nutrition. And so for us, we always want to understand kind of where are they coming from. There are athletes that, and I'm a kind of an old school runner. I come from a day and age of running marathons on water and having absolutely nothing. This is the dark ages. And so a lot of athletes still kind of come from this mentality of no pain, no gain. And they almost see bonking as kind of a necessary part of life in endurance sports, but it really doesn't have to be. And I think that, we get asked a lot of times if we, because we have such this kind of focus on high performance, that if we also work with everyday athletes. And actually, everyday athletes are our bread and butter as a business. And our goal is to really help them. And it's not just for us just about winning, which is, I think a lot of times when you're a performance brand, people immediately assume that you're kind of only focused on like elite sport or something like that. Our job, as we see it, is really to make the everyday athlete's experience better. So with that said, proper fueling can lead to winning a race. It can lead to a PR, but it can also just be a matter of not having a terrible experience. And for us, that's really what it's about. And so a lot of times when we meet athletes, we'll talk immediately about like, what have they been doing? And then and a lot of times it's a mishmash. It's a mixed bag of stuff. And we usually encourage them to try and and most of them are frustrated. Most of them are frustrated with their fueling. They're not satisfied with what they're doing. And inevitably, we'll recommend, look, why don't you just stop what you're doing? Take a look at the closed loop system. Don't do anything on race day. Do whatever you're doing on race day, because I've just met you. But when you get back home, try using our products as your mainstay and only use them during your sessions. Inevitably, we'll get, I would say, 100 emails a week from athletes who tell us, I changed, and this has forever changed the way I fuel. And that's really what we're about, is really kind of making athletes understand the importance of kind of using the closed loop system, using the right products. Because they're using the right products, they'll be able to take in more than they've ever been able to take in before. A lot of times athletes are having bad fueling experience, and their answer is then to underfuel. And so our answer is, well, maybe you need to look at the right fuel so that you can take more in, so that your energy levels are high and without the risk of the GI problems that you may be having. So that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but for us, it's always a matter of figuring out where did they come from, and it's usually from a place of mixing products together.
Well, Bill, here's to good fueling and good hydration and a successful Leadville Trail 100. Thanks for being on the show.
I look forward to seeing you. Thanks so much.
Thanks again to Bill Armstrong of NeverSecond. It should be noted that NeverSecond also makes the ice gel, which has shown some promise in helping cool an athlete. I can vouch for it. I love them. Kind of hard to execute at Leadville because you've got to keep them nearly frozen. But you could keep one or two in a cooler at the feed zone.
NeverSecond is not the only company with a closed-loop nutrition system. To borrow Bill Armstrong's description, Precision Hydration is another company that has developed a line of products meant to be used together. And like NeverSecond, they dole out the carbs in 30, 60, and 90-gram increments. My interview with Bill Armstrong had nothing to do with the feed. I just happened to run into him at a bike show. But hey, we'd be remiss if we didn't tell you that NeverSecond is available at the feed, as is Precision Hydration and a lot of other great nutrition companies.
Yeah, my go-to for years and years has been Goo Energy. They're another company that has everything you need to build a complete kind of all-in-one brand. They've got their own nutrition strategy. It's a little harder to total the carbs out with them, but they've got it all. Drink, mix, gels, chews, their stroop waffles. And I've made it around Leadville many times on their system.
Like Fatty and I always say when it comes to this stuff, try it first in training or in a race not called Leadville. Figure out what works. If it's NeverSecond, great. If it's Goo or Cliff or Morton or SIS, great as well. And great about all of this is you can find those products and more at the feed.
Yep. So go claim your $80 annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville. Go ahead and register your email, verify your phone number, and then you can start spending your feed credit of $20 right away.
Hey, thanks again to everyone who's been responding to our questions and surveys on the Leadville 100 Facebook participants page. We will be turning some of that info into episodes this season, so watch out for that.
Yep. And if you would like to go a little deeper into Leadville conversation, go check out our Slack channel. Go get a code for it at leadville.fm/Slack. And then if you like the show, go wherever you listen and give us a 5-star rating and write a review. To see all the ways you can do this, go to leadville.fm.
Good luck in your training. Thanks for listening, and we will see you at the starting line.